Harold Williams had learned to navigate the world through sounds, scents, and the gentle touch of morning air against his weathered face. At 73, he had been blind for nearly 2 decades, but his other senses had sharpened like finely tuned instruments. Today, like every Tuesday for the past 3 years, he wheeled himself to Riverside Park, seeking the peace that only nature could provide. The park buzzed with life around him. Children's laughter danced through the air, mixing with the distant hum of traffic and the rustle of leaves overhead. Harold positioned his wheelchair beneath his favorite oak tree, feeling the dappled sunlight warm his shoulders. This spot had become his sanctuary, a place where he could forget about the cruelty he often faced in the outside world. His fingers traced the smooth armrests of his chair as he settled in for what he hoped would be another peaceful afternoon. The sweet fragrance of blooming jasmine filled his nostrils, while somewhere nearby, a robin sang its cheerful song. Harold closed his sightless eyes and allowed himself to drift into the comfortable rhythm of park life. He had not always been this way. Once, Harold had been a construction foreman, his strong hands building homes for families across the city. His legs had carried him swiftly across job sites. His eyes had seen every detail of architectural plans, and his voice had commanded respect from his crew. But life has a way of changing course without warning. The accident that took his sight had also damaged his spine, confining him to the wheelchair that now served as his primary means of mobility. The early years after his accident had been the hardest. His wife, Margaret, had stood by him through the initial surgeries and the long rehabilitation process. She had been his eyes when the world went dark, his strength when despair threatened to overwhelm him. But cancer had claimed her 5 years ago, leaving Harold to navigate his challenges alone. Their children lived across the country, busy with their own lives and families, calling occasionally, but visiting rarely. Harold had learned to find solace in simple things. The warmth of sunlight on his face reminded him that beauty still existed in his dark world. The sound of children playing brought back memories of his own kids when they were young. The gentle breeze carried stories from across the park, each rustle and whisper painting pictures in his mind that his eyes could no longer see. Today felt different somehow. The air carried a tension he could not quite identify, like the electric charge that precedes a thunderstorm. Conversations around him seemed more hushed, more hurried. Footsteps passed by with unusual urgency, as if everyone had somewhere important to be. Harold shifted in his chair, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over him like a heavy blanket. A group of teenagers skateboarded past, their wheels clicking rhythmically against the pavement cracks. Their laughter was genuine and carefree, reminding Harold of his own youth, when the world had seemed full of endless possibilities. He smiled slightly, remembering how he and his friends used to spend entire summer days in parks, just like this one, never wanting the sun to set on their adventures. The sound of approaching footsteps broke through his reverie. These were different from the casual strolls of park visitors or the determined pace of joggers. These steps were heavy, deliberate, and carried an authority that made Harold's stomach tighten with instinctive worry. He had learned to recognize the sound of trouble long before it announced itself with words. Harold straightened in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests as the footsteps grew closer. Years of blindness had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every instinct screamed that his peaceful afternoon was about to end. The sounds of the park seemed to fade into the background as his world narrowed to focus on the approaching presence that felt heavy with menace. The footsteps stopped directly in front of him, close enough that Harold could smell the sharp scent of aftershave mixed with sweat. A shadow fell across his face, blocking the warmth of the sun he had been enjoying just moments before. Harold's heart began to race as he waited for the stranger to speak, knowing instinctively that whatever came next would shatter the tranquility of his perfect Tuesday afternoon. He had no way of knowing that this moment would become the catalyst for a story that would spread across the nation, touching hearts and igniting conversations about dignity, courage, and what it truly means to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Harold simply sat in his wheelchair, blind and vulnerable, waiting for a storm he could sense but could not see approaching. "What do we have here?" The voice cut through the peaceful park atmosphere like a blade through silk. Officer Marcus Daniels stood over Harold, his uniform crisp despite the afternoon heat, his badge catching the filtered sunlight streaming through the tree branches. But there was nothing protective or serving about his tone. It dripped with contempt, each word calculated to diminish and intimidate. Harold's spine stiffened at the sound. He had heard that particular tone too many times in his life, the voice of someone who saw him not as a human being, but as a problem to be solved or removed. "Good afternoon, officer," Harold replied carefully, his voice steady despite the fear beginning to coil in his chest. "I'm just enjoying the park on this beautiful day." Daniels circled the wheelchair slowly, his boots scraping against the concrete path with deliberate menace. To the casual observer, he might have appeared to be conducting a routine patrol, but Harold could feel the malice radiating from the man, like heat from asphalt. "Enjoying the park?" Daniels sneered. "You think this place is for people like you to just sit around taking up space?" The words hit Harold like physical blows. He had faced discrimination before, but something about this officer's tone suggested a cruelty that went beyond casual prejudice. This was personal, targeted, and dangerous. "Sir, I'm not bothering anyone," Harold said, his voice smaller now, trying to make himself less of a target. "I come here often. I have every right to be here." "Rights?" Daniels laughed, the sound harsh and joyless. "Let me tell you about rights, old man. The right people have is to enjoy this park without looking at." He paused, his eyes scanning Harold with disgust. "Without having to see this pathetic display." Harold's hands trembled on his wheelchair's armrests. Nearby, he could hear conversations growing quieter, footsteps slowing as people began to notice the confrontation unfolding. But no one approached. No one intervened. Harold was alone with a man whose badge was supposed to represent protection, but who wielded it like a weapon of intimidation. Without warning, Daniels grabbed the handles of Harold's wheelchair and gave it a violent shove. The chair lurched forward, nearly tipping over a small curb, and Harold gasped as he fought to maintain his balance. Pain shot through his already fragile spine as the chair jarred to a stop. "Please," Harold whispered, his dignity beginning to crack under the assault. "Please don't do this." But Daniels was just getting started. The power he felt in that moment, the absolute control over another human being, fed something dark inside him. He kicked the side of Harold's wheelchair, the metal ringing with a hollow sound that seemed to echo across the suddenly silent section of the park. Harold cried out, not just from the physical shock, but from the humiliation of being treated like an object rather than a person. "Look at you," Daniels hissed, leaning down so his face was close to Harold's ear. "Blind, crippled, worthless. What exactly do you contribute to society? What's your purpose besides taking up space and resources that could go to real people?" Each word was designed to cut deep, to strip away not just Harold's dignity, but his very sense of worth as a human being. Harold's mind raced back through his life, the homes he had built, the family he had raised, the taxes he had paid, the community he had served. But under the withering assault of Daniel's cruelty, those accomplishments felt distant and insignificant. The officer's words found their mark, awakening the deepest fears that Harold carried about his own value in a world that often saw disability as burden rather than diversity. Another shove sent the wheelchair skittering sideways, and Harold had to grip the armrests to keep from falling out. His cane, carefully positioned across his lap, clattered to the ground and rolled away into the grass. Without it, Harold felt even more helpless, cut off from his primary tool for navigating the world independently. A small crowd had begun to gather at a safe distance, their whispered conversations creating a low buzz of concern and outrage. But concern and outrage without action meant nothing to Harold in that moment. He needed help, not sympathy. He needed someone to step forward and say that what was happening was wrong, that he deserved basic human dignity regardless of his disabilities. Daniel seemed to feed off the attention, playing to his unwilling audience like a performer on a stage. "Look, everyone," he called out, his voice carrying across the park. "This is what happens when people forget their place, when they think they can just go wherever they want and do whatever they want without consequences." Harold felt tears beginning to form in his sightless eyes, not tears of self-pity, but tears of rage and helplessness. He had survived the loss of his sight, the death of his wife, the isolation of his later years. But this systematic destruction of his humanity threatened to break something in him that he was not sure could be repaired. The afternoon sun continued to shine, children continued to play in distant parts of the park, and life went on all around them. But in that small circle beneath the oak tree, darkness was falling. Harold Williams, a man who had built homes and raised children and contributed to his community for over 7 decades, was being reduced to nothing more than a target for one man's cruelty. What Harold could not know was that less than 100 yards away, 2 figures were finishing their training session at the park's outdoor gym. 2 men whose names were known around the world, whose strength was legendary, and whose sense of justice was about to be put to the ultimate test. John Cena wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished his final set of push-ups on the outdoor exercise equipment. Beside him, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was completing his workout with characteristic intensity, the muscles in his massive frame rippling with each movement. They had chosen this public park for their training session specifically to connect with the community, believing that fitness should be accessible to everyone, regardless of their circumstances. "Great session today," Dwayne said, rolling his shoulders as he prepared to head back to their waiting vehicle. The 2 superstars had been friends for years, their bond forged through shared experiences in the wrestling ring and strengthened by mutual respect for each other's work ethic and character. They often trained together when their schedules allowed, pushing each other to new heights while maintaining the camaraderie that had made them both beloved figures in popular culture. As they gathered their equipment, John's attention was caught by a commotion near the center of the park. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a crowd gathering around some minor incident, but something about the energy of the situation felt wrong. The people weren't laughing or celebrating. They were standing in tense silence, watching something with obvious discomfort, but seemingly unwilling to intervene. "You see that?" John asked, nodding toward the growing crowd. His years in professional wrestling had taught him to read crowds, to understand the difference between excitement and concern, between entertainment and genuine distress. This crowd was definitely experiencing the latter. Dwayne followed his gaze, his expression growing serious as he took in the scene. Even from a distance, they could see someone in uniform standing over a figure in a wheelchair. The body language was all wrong, aggressive, threatening, predatory. "That doesn't look right," Dwayne said, his voice carrying the same intensity he brought to his most dramatic movie roles. They began walking toward the commotion, their imposing figures drawing glances from other park visitors who recognized them instantly. Phones began appearing in hands, initially to capture photos of the celebrities. But as John and Dwayne got closer to the confrontation, the focus of those cameras began to shift. The sound reached them before they could clearly see what was happening. A man's voice, harsh and cruel, filled with the kind of venom that both John and Dwayne recognized from their own encounters with bullies throughout their lives. Then came another sound that stopped them both in their tracks, the voice of an elderly man, trembling with fear and pleading for mercy. "Please, I'm begging you. Stop." The words cut through both men like physical blows. John's jaw clenched as memories of his own childhood flashed through his mind, times when he had been smaller, weaker, at the mercy of those who used their size and position to intimidate others. Dwayne's hands curled into fists as he remembered the promise he had made to himself years ago, never to stand by and watch the strong prey upon the weak. They pushed through the crowd, their celebrity status giving them an automatic path as people stepped aside. What they saw when they reached the center of the commotion filled them both with a rage so pure and focused that it took all their self-control not to act immediately. Harold Williams sat in his wheelchair, his frail body trembling from both fear and the physical impacts he had endured. His cane lay in the grass several feet away, and his clothes were disheveled from the rough handling. But it was the look on his face that truly broke their hearts. The expression of a man whose dignity was being systematically destroyed by someone sworn to protect and serve. Officer Daniels stood over Harold like a predator over wounded prey, clearly enjoying the power he held over the defenseless man. He was in the middle of delivering another verbal assault when John's voice cut through the air like thunder. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The authority in John's voice was unmistakable. Years of commanding audiences of thousands had given him the ability to project not just volume but presence. And every person in that park suddenly knew that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic of the confrontation. Daniels turned, his expression shifting from cruel satisfaction to shock as he found himself face to face with two of the most recognizable men in America. For a moment, his bravado faltered as he processed the reality of the situation. He was no longer the biggest, strongest person in this confrontation. "Move along," Daniels said, trying to recover his authority, but failing to hide the uncertainty in his voice. "This is police business. Nothing to see here." Dwayne stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the smaller officer. "Police business looks a lot like abuse from where we're standing," he said, his voice carrying the weight of mountains. "We saw what you were doing to this man." The crowd began to murmur with excitement and recognition. Phones rose higher. Cameras focused not just on the celebrities, but on the entire scene unfolding before them. Social media notifications began pinging across the park as people started live streaming and sharing what they were witnessing. John knelt beside Harold's wheelchair, his expression softening as he addressed the elderly man. "Are you okay, sir?" he asked gently, his voice a stark contrast to the harsh tones Harold had been enduring. "We're here now. You're safe." Harold turned his head toward the sound of John's voice, confusion and hope warring in his expression. He could not see his rescuers, but he could feel the genuine concern in John's words, the protective presence that both men projected. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, Harold felt like he was being treated as a human being rather than an object of scorn. "Thank you," Harold whispered, his voice barely audible. "Thank you for stopping." Dwayne's eyes blazed as he turned back to Daniels, who was now reaching for his radio with trembling hands. "You have two choices," Dwayne said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You can walk away right now and hope this doesn't go any further, or you can keep pushing and see what happens when you pick on someone your own size." The challenge hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Officer Daniels, faced with a crowd of witnesses, dozens of cameras, and two men whose combined strength was literally legendary, made the worst possible choice. Instead of de-escalating, instead of showing mercy or even basic human decency, he doubled down on his cruelty and reached for his baton. "You want to interfere with police business," he snarled, his voice cracking with desperate bravado. "Let's see how tough you really are." The moment Officer Daniels' hand closed around his baton, the entire atmosphere of the park shifted. What had been a tense confrontation between a bully and his victim had suddenly become something far more dangerous, a standoff between those who abuse power and those willing to stand against them. The crowd instinctively stepped back, creating a larger circle around the confrontation, but their phones remained raised, capturing every moment of what was about to unfold. John Cena rose slowly from his position beside Harold's wheelchair, his movements deliberate and controlled. Years of professional wrestling had taught him to read opponents, to anticipate their moves, and to respond with precision rather than wild aggression. Beside him, Dwayne Johnson positioned himself protectively between Harold and the aggressive officer, his massive frame a wall of defiance against the abuse they had witnessed. "Sir, you don't want to do this," John said, his voice carrying both warning and opportunity. "Put the baton down, and we can all walk away from this situation. No one needs to get hurt." But Daniels was beyond reason. The humiliation of being challenged in public, the rage at having his authority questioned, and the intoxicating power he had felt while tormenting Harold had combined into a toxic cocktail that overwhelmed his judgment. He raised his radio to his lips with his free hand and barked into it. "Unit 47 requesting immediate backup. Officers under attack at Riverside Park. Repeat, officers under attack." The lie rang clearly through the air, captured by dozens of phones and witnessed by hundreds of people. Harold flinched at the words, knowing instinctively what they meant. More uniforms would arrive, and the odds would shift dramatically against the two men who had dared to protect him. Dwayne's expression hardened at the false report. "Officer under attack," he said, his voice carrying deadly calm. "The only person being attacked here was that elderly man, and you were the one doing it." Sirens began wailing in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. The sound sent ripples of tension through the crowd as people realized they were witnessing something that would have far-reaching consequences. Some began to back away, not wanting to be involved in whatever was coming. Others pressed closer, determined to document the truth of what was happening. When Daniel swung his baton toward John, everything seemed to happen in slow motion. John's hand shot out with the speed and precision that had made him a champion, catching the officer's wrist and stopping the weapon inches from his face. The crack of the baton hitting John's palm echoed across the park like a gunshot. "I tried to give you a way out," John said through gritted teeth as he twisted the baton from Daniel's grasp. The weapon clattered to the ground, spinning away across the concrete. "You chose this." The first police car arrived with screaming sirens and flashing lights, followed quickly by two more. Officers poured out of the vehicles, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons as they assessed the scene. What they saw was chaos. A crowd of civilians surrounding their colleague, and two men who looked like they could bench press a small car. "They attacked me," Daniel screamed, pointing at John and Dwayne while backing toward his arriving colleagues. "Arrest them both." But the crowd erupted in response. "Liar," someone shouted. "We saw everything," called another voice. "He was beating that old man." The chorus of witnesses grew louder and more insistent, their voices carrying the weight of truth against Daniel's desperate fabrications. The arriving officers found themselves in an impossible situation. On one side stood their colleague, demanding arrests and claiming assault. On the other side stood two internationally famous celebrities, surrounded by dozens of witnesses, all of whom seemed to be contradicting the official story. And in the center of it all sat Harold Williams, still trembling in his wheelchair, the physical evidence of abuse clear on his person and in his positioning. The senior officer, Sergeant Martinez, had been on the force for 25 years and had developed a keen sense for reading situations. What he saw here didn't match the panic radio call that had brought them racing across the city. He noticed the phones recording everything, the unified voice of the crowd supporting the celebrities, and most telling of all, the defensive positioning of Cena and Johnson around the elderly man rather than any aggressive stance toward officers. "Everyone stay calm," Martinez called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I want to understand what happened here before anyone makes a move they might regret." But Daniels wasn't interested in calm or understanding. His authority had been challenged, his abuse had been witnessed, and his lies were being exposed in real time to an audience of millions through social media. In his panicked mind, the only solution was to escalate until he could regain control of the narrative. "I said arrest them," Daniel screamed at his colleagues. "They assaulted a police officer. Do your jobs." Two of the younger officers began moving toward John and Dwayne, their training overriding their doubt about the situation. But Sergeant Martinez held up his hand, stopping them. He had noticed something that Daniels hadn't. The crowd wasn't just recording anymore. They were live streaming. Whatever happened next would be broadcast instantly to potentially millions of viewers. John stepped forward with his hands visible and open, showing no aggressive intent. "Sergeant," he said, addressing Martinez directly, "your officer was physically abusing this elderly man when we arrived. We intervened to protect him. Everything we did was in defense of someone who couldn't defend himself." Harold's voice rose from his wheelchair, shaky but clear. "It's true," he said. "That officer kicked me, pushed my chair, knocked my cane away. These men saved me." The weight of Harold's testimony hung in the air like truth itself. Here was the alleged victim, supporting the story of the supposed attackers and contradicting the official account. Sergeant Martinez had seen enough police misconduct cases to recognize the pattern, and everything about this situation screamed cover-up and abuse of power. Dwayne stepped closer to Martinez, his voice low but carrying clearly to everyone present. "Sergeant, you have a choice to make right here, right now. You can stand with truth and justice, or you can stand with abuse of power. Everyone's watching. Everyone's recording. What kind of cop do you want to be remembered as?" The moment stretched taut as Martinez weighed his options. He could follow procedure and arrest the celebrities based on his fellow officers' claims, knowing it would likely destroy his career when the truth came out. or he could follow his conscience and his experience, recognizing that sometimes the badge doesn't automatically make someone right. Before Martinez could respond, Daniels made the decision for everyone. Seeing his story crumbling and his colleagues hesitating, he lunged toward Harold's wheelchair one more time, perhaps thinking that another assault would provoke the reaction he needed to justify his claims. He never made it to Harold. Dwayne Johnson moved with surprising speed for such a large man, intercepting Daniels and gently but firmly pushing him back. It wasn't violent, it wasn't excessive, but it was definitive. The message was clear. No one would be allowed to hurt Harold Williams again. The crowd cheered. Cameras captured everything, and Sergeant Martinez made his choice. The cheers from the crowd echoed across Riverside Park as Sergeant Martinez stepped forward, his decision crystallizing with the clarity that comes from choosing right over easy. 25 years on the force had taught him many things, but perhaps the most important was the difference between protecting and serving versus protecting and covering up. This moment would define not just his career, but his legacy as a peace officer. "Officer Daniels," Martinez said, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through years of ethical service, "step away from the civilian and remove your hands from your weapon." His words cut through the chaos like a sword through fog, bringing sudden silence to the confrontation. Daniels' face went white, then red, as the implications of his sergeant's order became clear. "What are you doing?" he sputtered. "I told you they attacked me. I'm the victim here." But Martinez had seen enough. The evidence was overwhelming. Dozens of witnesses, multiple video recordings, and most damning of all, Harold Williams himself sitting as living proof of the abuse that had taken place. "Officer Daniels, you are suspended from duty pending a full investigation. Turn in your badge and weapon immediately." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Harold Williams sat in his wheelchair, tears streaming down his weathered face. Not tears of pain this time, but tears of relief and vindication. For the first time in hours, he felt safe. More than that, he felt heard. His truth had been acknowledged, his suffering recognized, and his dignity restored by the simple act of someone in authority choosing to believe him over the word of a fellow officer. John Cena knelt beside Harold once more, his hand gently touching the older man's shoulder. "Are you okay, sir?" he asked softly. "Do you need medical attention?" Harold nodded slowly, his voice thick with emotion. "I think I do," he admitted. "But more than that, I need to thank you both. I thought no one would believe me. I thought no one cared." Dwayne Johnson moved to Harold's other side, his massive presence now protective rather than intimidating. "Everyone should have someone willing to stand up for them," he said simply. "Today you had us. Tomorrow, hopefully, this won't happen to anyone else." The ambulance arrived within minutes, its paramedics quickly assessing Harold's injuries while treating him with the gentle respect that had been so cruelly absent during his ordeal with Daniels. As they prepared to transport him to the hospital for a full examination, Harold reached out toward the voices of his protectors. "I still can't see you," he said with a weak smile, "but I know I'll never forget your voices. Thank you for seeing me when I needed it most." The paramedics loaded Harold into the ambulance, but not before he was able to give a full statement to Sergeant Martinez, corroborating everything the witnesses had recorded and contradicting every element of Daniels' fabricated story. As the ambulance pulled away, its lights flashing but sirens silent, a hush fell over the crowd. Martinez turned to address John and Dwayne directly. "I apologize for what happened here today," he said sincerely. "This is not what the badge represents, and it's not what the community deserves from law enforcement. We will conduct a full investigation, and I can assure you that justice will be served." John shook the sergeant's hand firmly. "We appreciate that, Sergeant. But the real hero here was Mr. Williams. He showed courage in the face of abuse, and he deserves to have his story told." The story spread across social media with the speed that only truth combined with celebrity can achieve. Within hours, #JusticeForHarold was trending worldwide. The video footage, crystal clear and unambiguous, showed every moment of Daniel's abuse and every second of John and Dwayne's intervention. News networks picked up the story, and talk show hosts dedicated segments to discussing police accountability and the importance of standing up for the vulnerable. But the real impact was felt in quieter moments, in conversations between parents and children about doing what's right even when it's difficult, in police departments across the country reviewing their training and accountability measures, and in the hearts of people who saw that sometimes justice really can prevail. Officer Daniels was not only fired from the police force, but also faced criminal charges for assault, abuse of authority, and filing false reports. The internal investigation revealed a pattern of complaints against him that had been ignored or covered up, leading to broader reforms within the department. His conviction, when it came, was swift and decisive, a clear message that no one is above the law, especially those entrusted to enforce it. Harold Williams recovered from his physical injuries, but more importantly, he became an advocate for others facing similar treatment. With the support of John and Dwayne, who remained in contact with him long after the cameras stopped rolling, Harold began speaking at community events about dignity, respect, and the importance of believing survivors of abuse regardless of their circumstances. "I learned something that day," Harold would often say in his speeches, his voice strong and clear. "I learned that darkness only wins when good people choose to look away. But when good people choose to step forward, when they choose to see those who are being made invisible, that's when miracles happen." John Cena and Dwayne Johnson never sought recognition for their actions that day. They had simply done what they felt any decent person should do: protect someone who couldn't protect himself. But their intervention had ripple effects far beyond a single afternoon in a park. They had shown the world that fame and strength carry responsibilities, that true heroes are measured not by the opponents they defeat in a ring, but by the vulnerable people they protect in real life. The park itself became a symbol of change. A small plaque was installed near the oak tree where Harold had been sitting, reading simply, "In honor of all those who stand up for others when standing up requires courage." It serves as a daily reminder to visitors that heroism isn't about superhuman powers or larger-than-life personas. It's about ordinary people making extraordinary choices when they witness injustice. Years later, when Harold Williams passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 81, his obituary mentioned his career as a construction foreman and his decades as a devoted husband and father. But it also mentioned that afternoon in Riverside Park, when two wrestlers turned actors showed the world what it really means to be strong, and when an elderly blind man showed everyone what it means to have dignity that cannot be destroyed, no matter how hard someone tries to take it away. The story lived on, passed down from parents to children, shared in classrooms and community centers, a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in arenas or on movie screens, but in everyday moments when ordinary people are called upon to choose between looking away and stepping forward. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we choose to step forward.